I have bound myself to a strategy system that mandates my mission to redeem a reborn, darkened villain whose temperament is as unpredictable as the weather and who harbors no trust in others. System. Let us select an identity, shall we? You may choose to be either his childhood neighbor or the malicious female antagonist who will eventually become his capable subordinate. I replied, I wish to be his mother. System. With a slight smile, I remarked, if redemption is the goal, it would be best to prevent all suffering from occurring in the first place. This time, let him experience the bliss of having a mother. 1. On an ordinary day, a system claiming to be dedicated to my quest for salvation bound itself to me, tasking me with the responsibility of rescuing a reborn, darkened antagonist. Although he is mercurial and distrustful of others, in critical moments, he may abandon you, and misunderstandings may arise due to other women. However, with perseverance, you shall ultimately achieve your objective. I gazed at the photograph of a fierce young man, his eyes icy and a long, prominent scar marking his face, maintaining a skeptical demeanor. System. Now, let us determine an identity for you. You may be his childhood neighbor or the treacherous female character destined to become his loyal subordinate. The system paused, its tone filled with satisfaction. Essentially, you can choose any female character who can interact with him. Aren't I clever? I nodded. Then I choose to be his mother. System. I added, after all, a son is far more precious than a boyfriend. Thus, I transformed into the mother of Wen Paifan, who was but an infant at the time. His father had perished in an accident, leaving only the original weak woman behind. I end the original plot. Due to the compensation left by his father, covetous eyes were drawn to them. One fateful night, the mother was murdered by a thief who made off with the money and the child. This thief, a debauched and gambling man, was a bachelor who intended to take the child home to raise him. At that time, surveillance technology was not advanced and the perpetrator was never apprehended. However, after bringing the child home, the thief did not care for him. Instead, he resorted to beatings and abuse. Wen Paifan endured a miserable existence, never having attended school. As he grew older, the thief, in a drunken stupor, inadvertently revealed his lineage. In a fit of rage, Wen Paifan killed the thief and subsequently plunged into the underworld, struggling alone to survive. I glanced once more at his photograph as an adult. A long scar marred his face, nearly bisecting each remnant of the thief's brutality. He appeared fierce and wolf-like, exuding an aura of danger. 2. Wen Paifan's father was an orphan, devoid of any surviving relatives. Thus, I returned to the village where I had grown up, carrying with me a sum of 5,000 yuan. In this era, such an amount was considered quite substantial, as households with 10,000 yuan were a rarity. I arranged for someone to regularly oversee a small courtyard in the town, which would serve as a place for Wen Paifan to attend school once he grew older. The original owner was also an orphan, having been raised on the kindness of others. Although not every villager was virtuous, the general ethos was relatively simple and sincere. Moreover, the villagers were numerous and united. When challenges arose, assistance was rendered swiftly, unlike in the city where neighbors seldom communicated and a solitary room might go unnoticed for days. Upon my return to the village with the child, the villagers were taken aback. However, since I was providing financial support, the village secretary approved a foundation for me. I treated everyone to a meal, compensated them for their labor, and purchased meat. Before long, I had gathered enough hands to help construct my home. During this period, I stayed at the secretary's residence, as the original owner was still in her confinement period. Aunt Gu, the secretary's wife, tended to my postpartum needs, while his daughter-in-law, Cuehua, assisted in caring for Wen Paifan. At this time, Wen Paifan had already been reborn. His dark eyes were devoid of emotion, which was somewhat unsettling. Yet, being an infant, no amount of gloom could suppress his inherent instincts. He spent his days alternating between eating and sleeping, exhibiting a remarkable composure, rarely crying. Only when he was extremely hungry would he emit a few soft whimpers. Moreover, he utterly rejected my breast milk. When Aunt Gu cradled him in my arms, he persistently stuck out his tongue. I felt a bit awkward, as I had never been a mother and found direct nursing to be rather embarrassing. I had purchased formula and malted milk from the town, which were considered luxuries at the time. Cuehua prepared them for Wen Paifan, using a small spoon to feed him bit by bit. However, with an infant's small stomach, he could hardly hold anything. Shortly after drinking, he would wet himself, moving his legs and letting out a few grunts. Cuehua would help him change his diaper, patting his little bottom and laughing at him. He would undoubtedly grow up to be a stoic young man, already displaying such a demeanor from infancy. when Paifan's tiny hands flailed about, seemingly attempting to cover his face before he let out a couple of cries, signaling for me to hold him. I chuckled softly and took him into my arms, whereupon he regarded me with curious eyes. I gently reassured him, "I am your mother. This time, you shall lead a life filled with happiness." 3. The new house was swiftly completed, and with the assistance of the system, I efficiently procured furniture. When Paifan and I moved into our new abode, where his favorite pastime became the act of gazing at me with wide-eyed wonder. In those moments, I would delight in teasing him, laughing heartily at his exasperated expressions. When Paifan would flail his little hands in protest, yet in the next instant, he would be contentedly sipping from a bottle before drifting off to sleep. Thus, when Paifan grew to the age of 3, he was not fond of venturing outside, but due to my frequent culinary endeavors, many children would come to visit. Consequently, he was never short of companions, yet he often wore a sulky expression, earning him the playful nickname of Little Old Man among his peers. Today, I had brought him a little hat, dressed him in yellow overalls filled with candy, and attached a small water cup for him. "Let us go find your friends to play," I urged, with a cool demeanor, when Paifan nonetheless clung to my leg, his small voice pleading, "Mama, I don't want to go out." I knelt down, gazing at him with tenderness and encouragement. "Today is an adventure for our little warrior. I promise to wait for you at home." 4. I gently nudged when Paifan out the door, and with the system's assistance, I was able to observe the live feed. I watched as he stood at the threshold, his little face contorted in contemplation. Eventually, he took a few tentative steps forward. Judging by his direction, he was likely headed towards the pile at the village entrance, a favored spot for the local children to play hide-and-seek. I had taken him there several times before. Along the way, several adults spotted him and greeted him. Fan, where are you off to?" When Paifan took a couple of steps forward before pausing, slowly lifting his head, he finally replied, "Going out to play." The adults chuckled warmly. "Off you go. But don't wander too far." He was not one to engage much with others. In the past, he would often nestle against me when we ventured out. However, I had taught him the importance of responding to greetings as a matter of courtesy. He nodded his small head and replied in a low, earnest tone, "Thank you. I know." The adults affectionately ruffled his hair, and he shook his head, taking a few deliberate steps away. As he walked, he adjusted his blue hat adorned with a small tiger. Despite having once commented that it was childish, I knew he cherished it, as he often fiddled with it. Hence, I ensured that his clothing was embroidered with an array of whimsical animals. 5. After a considerable walk, he finally arrived at the pile. The village children spotted him and immediately surrounded him with a chorus of excitement. Fan, why are you playing by yourself? Where's your mama?" A little girl pointed at the yellow duck on his overalls and exclaimed, "Your outfit is so lovely." Her eyes glimmered with envy. In this era, most children lacked new clothes, often wearing hand-me-downs from adults. The boys also gathered around to admire the little tiger on Paifan's head. He covered his head with his hands and declared loudly, "Don't touch me, or I won't give you any candy." Upon hearing the word candy, the children erupted with enthusiasm. Candy. There's candy. They quickly lined up in anticipation. When Paifan sighed and instructed them, "You must sit nicely to get the treats." They nodded eagerly and sat down in a row. When Paifan then retrieved candy from his pocket, distributing it among them. Some children licked the wrappers while munching on the sweets. "Your mama is so nice, always dressing you in new clothes and giving you candy. If only your mama were my mama." This sentiment resonated with the group, as they all chimed in, yes, if only she were my mama." Some children grew envious, arguing, "You're lazy. Your mama wouldn't tea like you. You're too mischievous. Your mama wouldn't tea like you either." This made Paifan a bit irate, and in a huff, he reached out to snatch the candy back. "That's my mama. She wouldn't tea like any of you. Not a single one." The other children quickly covered their mouths to stifle their laughter, fearing his retaliation. When Paifan glared at them for a moment, but his efforts proved futile. He turned on his heel and stomped away. 6. After running for a while, he likely grew tired and squatted by the roadside, taking a sip from his water bottle. After a moment's hesitation, he unwrapped a white rabbit candy and popped it into his mouth. His cheeks immediately puffed up, and I chuckled, thinking he resembled a little hamster. Suddenly, a sparrow swooped down, perched in front of him, tilting its head curiously, unafraid of humans. When Paifan watched for a moment before pulling out a biscuit from his pocket, breaking it into pieces, and tossing it onto the ground. The little sparrow, with wide eyes, observed him for a while before bowing its head to eat the crumbs. The system, observing such a scene, remarked, "Who would have thought this child is a ruthless little villain?" At that moment, when Paifan appeared fair and plump, even slightly chubby compared to the other children, his round hands and cherubic face made him look like a little dumpling. I replied, "Indeed, it is entirely normal for bountiful lands to yield beautiful blossoms." The system, eager to ingratiate itself, chimed in, "The villain's favorability rating has already reached 60%. This is simply astonishing. It would take decades to win over such a villain." I cast a proud glance at it and said, "It's only natural for children to be fond of those who care for them daily." The system retorted, "You're so full of yourself." With that, I began to scoop up some flour, preparing to bake some buttery cookies. Through the system's live feed, I noticed when Paifan nearing the large tree in front of her house. I promptly stepped outside, holding the candied hawthorn I had made, being careful to monitor his sugar intake to prevent any dental issues. Standing at the threshold, I adorned myself in a charming yellow floral dress. Upon catching sight of Paifan, I called out to him, "Fan Fan." He had initially been taking small steps but suddenly broke into a light run. As he dashed forward, laughter bubbled forth from him, revealing a few small milk teeth. It was the first time I had witnessed such unbridled joy on his face. I opened my arms and enveloped him in a warm embrace, joyfully inquiring, "Did you have a good time today?" He nuzzled against my neck, nodding vigorously. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, gently setting him down and presenting him with a candied hawthorn, saying, "A reward for the little warrior." His eyes sparkled with delight as he extended his tongue to lick the sugary treat, blissfully squinting his eyes in enjoyment. The system buzzed curiously around him. The villain has turned into a greedy little cat. Following this incident, Paifan seemed to radiate a newfound vivacity. Though he was still reluctant to venture outdoors, he was more willing to play when friends beckoned him. The children, displaying commendable loyalty, patted their chests and assured me they would protect Paifan, a reward for my frequent indulgences. Aside from the village gossipers who speculated about potential suitors for me or the amount of money I possessed, life flowed peacefully. One day, a knock echoed from the front door. Given the villagers' penchant for hospitality, often visiting neighbors uninvited, I had taken to securing the door. "Who is it?" As I approached the entrance, ready to unfasten the latch, the system anxiously interjected, "Host, do not open the door. It's that thief. The one who killed the original host." My hand hesitated, but I casually pulled the door open. "It's fine. I have some knowledge of self-defense," I reassured. The system replied, "Oh, nearly forgot. After all, the widow's home is often a hotbed for trouble, and much of my tranquil life can be attributed to my formidable fists." After dealing with some unruly ruffians, the villagers knew that the returning woman was not only wealthy, but also fierce. Upon opening the door, a man in a crisp shirt stood before me, looking quite presentable, though he bore the unmistakable scent of someone who had spent years indulging in alcohol and tobacco. I smiled and inquired, "May I help you?" He glanced around the yard, a glimmer of greed flickering in his eyes. "Hello, I am Eru. I've been working away for years and recently returned to the village. I heard you are the new resident here, so I came to meet you." I nodded with a smile. "Hello, I'm Su Qianma. I'm not actually new. I grew up here, just returned to the village." "Ah, I see. But I don't think I've ever seen you around. You're not from this village, are you?" Eru replied awkwardly with a chuckle. "I came here partway, so I can be considered a local." Just then, a voice called out from behind, "Mama." I turned to see Paifan emerging from the house, having awakened from his afternoon nap. I waved him over. "Fan Fan, come here. This is the new uncle, Eru." Paifan scampered over, his tiger-like eyes fixating on Eru, his entire demeanor tense. He clung to my leg without uttering a word. Eru chuckled awkwardly, pulling 2 cookies from his pocket, attempting to coax, "Hey there, little one, these are cookies. Haven't you seen them before? Go ahead, have some." A few years ago, such a treat would have been a novelty for the village children. However, now Paifan was nearly tired of them, often using them to feed the sparrows. Even the other children did not seem overly tempted. Thus, Paifan merely glanced at him, extending his small hand. As Eru began to smile, Paifan suddenly tossed the cookie far away. Eru clicked his tongue, momentarily revealing a menacing expression, but quickly composed himself upon realizing he was being watched. "Huh? This little one is a bit rude, isn't he?" Hearing him call my child rude, my expression darkened, and I scooped Paifan into my arms. "He's still young. He doesn't appreciate being teased. If there's nothing else, I'll be closing the door." After shutting the door, I observed the system through my vision as it scratched its head, muttering, "Little rascal." He took a few steps, attempting to retrieve the cookie, but turned to see the neighbor peering over the wall. Ultimately, he departed, muttering curses under his breath. Aunt Hua, seeing him leave, hurriedly dashed over to collect the cookie, then knocked on my door. I opened it, cradling Wen Pai Fan. And Aunt Hua entered, speaking in hushed tones, "Young lady, you are quite fortunate. Era has returned with wealth, and seems to have taken a liking to you." I chuckled. "How do you know he has come into money?" Aunt Hua replied, "Isn't it obvious? Just look at how he's dressed, like someone from the city. And he even brought you cookies." As she spoke, she retrieved the cookie she had found, probing, "You don't want this, do you? I could take it back." I shook my head but cautioned, "He has been away for years. Who knows what kind of dealings he has been involved in? Just be cautious." I added, "I have plenty of cookies here if you'd like to take some home." Aunt Hua nodded in agreement. "True, but don't worry, nothing bad will happen. If he harbors ill intentions, the villagers will surely put him in his place." In the end, Aunt Hua left without taking the cookie, perhaps feeling a bit guilty as her son often mooched meals from me. I didn't mind, as the villagers still needed to work the fields, which I did not do. Though I purchased grain, as a member of the village I knew it was important to contribute. Each year, I would also provide a sum to the village head for unexpected repairs. Consequently, most villagers held no grievances against me. Rather, they regarded me as a benefactor to be revered. Of course, there were those who foolishly considered thievery, but the ducks and guard dogs in my yard were no pushovers. I had thoughtfully enclosed the fence around the yard, ensuring that anyone who dared intrude would find themselves ensnared. Once the visitors departed, Wen Pai Fan nestled comfortably in my embrace, gazing up at me. He likely felt guilty for having discarded the cookie, fearing reprimand. I chose not to lecture him, but merely tapped his nose playfully. "Would you like a cookie? They're bear-shaped." I must admit, possessing this magical tool has proven immensely beneficial. The system not only allows me to replicate harmless little items infinitely, but also keeps them fresh. I recall when I first proposed such a request, it was quite apprehensive. "This doesn't seem appropriate." I probed, "Why not? It neither affects others nor disrupts the market. It's merely a way to simplify caring for little ones." The system hesitantly attempted it twice, and, to its surprise, nothing went awry. Gradually, it evolved into my little cheat tool. In fact, my current lifestyle is largely sustained by it, as it has investigated various businesses, allowing me to earn dividends through investments. Never underestimate a business person. Though the current situation may not reflect it, anyone would accept a profitable venture. As when Pai Fan munched on a cookie, he exclaimed, "Big bad guy, ignore him." I patted his head, soothing his distress. "I understand, don't worry." Perhaps Aunt Hua's words held some truth. Arrow indeed seemed to have developed an interest in me. He would often meander toward my home, and on several occasions, when I opened the door, I would find him posing under the large tree at my doorstep. Upon seeing me, his eyes would light up. Sister, what a remarkable coincidence." Before he could finish, I would firmly shut the door. Each time this occurred, Wen Pai Fan would pout adorably, feeding the little wolf dog, muttering, "Eat up, bite him, bite him." The system trembled in fear. "Host, do you think he can be reasoned with?" I chuckled at its alarm, for from my observations, Wen Pai Fan was merely a child with some memories. Children often harbor a dislike for certain individuals, wishing to frighten them away with their pets. Such sentiments are perfectly normal. The system responded with a silent acknowledgement. I took 2 steps forward, grasping Wen Pai Fan's collar and lifting him up. His little feet flailed in the air as he looked up at me, a sweet smile gracing his face. "Mama," he exclaimed. I pinched his armpits, twirling him around a few times, which sent him into a fit of giggles as he clung to my neck. I said, "Pai Fan is growing up. It's time for school." The mere mention of school ignited a spark of anticipation in his eyes, which he was blissfully unaware of. "School?" I nodded in affirmation. In this era, few children pursue education, partially because boys are considered laborers and partly due to rural activities that lead many to deem education futile. However, when Pai Fan matures and the college entrance examination resumes, I would rather he engage with peers at school than remain at home lost in thought. Thus, I prepared both of us, and we boarded the village's ox cart to venture into town for some paper and pencils to initiate his learning journey. On the ox cart, we were accompanied by other villagers heading to town. Upon seeing us, they greeted us warmly, especially Wen Pai Fan, whose fair, delicate features endeared him to everyone. The village aunties, with their affectionate charm, flocked to us. "Oh my, look at that handsome little face. And those tiny hands, how lovely they are." At first, When Paifan wore an aloof expression. But soon he shyly nestled into my embrace, not daring to lift his head. After the scars left by Eru had marred his face in a previous life. Children often cried in terror upon seeing him, and adults would display looks of disdain. Such candid compliments were likely foreign to him. I gently embraced him, pinching his bashful, rosy cheeks, and whispered in his ear, "So many people adore you." He attempted to suppress a smile, but ultimately revealed his two little front teeth. I first led Wen Paifan into a bookstore, where he curiously surveyed his surroundings. He seldom visited the town, much less the bookstore. Usually, I would discreetly include my own purchases, making it impractical to bring him along. The selection of paper and notebooks was rather mundane, so I casually picked a few. Afterward, I took him to the section selling books, where he looked around and inquired, "Are there no comic books?" I chuckled, explaining that comic books are sometimes scavenged from recycling stations due to the current crackdown. I feigned mystery, and he immediately sealed his lips, gripping my hand and insisting we leave. I then took him to the supply store, where rows of counters displayed a variety of goods. I lifted him up, and he was instantly captivated. The sales clerk, noticing us, cheerfully asked, "What would you like to buy, little one?" When Paifan furrowed his brows, his face resembling a frown, and he hesitated to respond, leaning his head against my shoulder. "Nothing, let's go home." I patted his back and smiled at the clerk. "I apologize. We're just browsing for now." I carried him to a quieter corner and softly asked, "Haven't decided what you want yet?" He nodded, a hint of disappointment clouding his expression. I asked what's wrong. To my surprise, his lips quivered, and he began to cry. It was unexpected. He had always been mature for his age, even refusing to cry when he fell. Perhaps he felt a bit embarrassed, covering his face and refusing to look up, his sobs muffled. I found it somewhat amusing. "What is it, really?" Without a response, I decided to let him explore a bit longer. After all, it was a rare outing, and I didn't want to return home too soon and risk his disappointment. At 4 years old, he was no lightweight, and carrying him continuously was becoming a bit tiring. Fortunately, my fitness routine had prepared me for the dual role of both father and mother. One must possess strength for such responsibilities. After a while, when Paifan's mood began to stabilize and he cautiously surveyed his surroundings, I took him to the toy aisle, then the food section, and even browsed through fabrics and furniture. Eventually, when Paifan gently squeezed my arm, prompting me to look over, "Have you found something?" His expression was a blend of hesitation and determination as he pointed to a doll and asked, "Can we buy that? It's for Xiaoya's birthday." Xiaoya, the granddaughter of the village head, was always cheerfully trailing behind him. I glanced at the doll, which, despite its rough craftsmanship, was a rare find. I nodded generously and inquired about the price. The clerk, eager to sell, informed me it was 50 yuan, emphasizing it was a foreign item of great rarity, and no receipt was necessary. When Paifan nervously fidgeted with his hands, but did not decline, I took the doll and placed it in his arms, paid for it, and said with satisfaction, "Now Paifan has a friend to care for." He hugged the doll tightly, partially hiding his face, and shyly stated, "Next birthday. I don't want any gifts, just this." I playfully tapped his little nose and replied nonchalantly, "It's all right. Mama has money. This time, you can do what you wish." Perhaps bolstered by the love and financial security I provided, the remnants of Wen Paifan's insecurities began to fade, despite the tumultuous memories he likely carried. After all, he was now the most beloved child in his class. On his first day of school, the teacher informed me that both boys and girls were vying to be his desk mate, leading to quite the scuffle. When Paifan, with a pout, complained, "They keep tugging at the bunny ears on my pants. I don't want to go to school anymore." Yet, the following day, he dutifully donned his little backpack and went to class. The summer breeze caressed his face, whisking away the dampness from his soul. His once diminutive figure stood taller, and a myriad of expressions began to grace his face. The boy, once shrouded in despair, had transformed into a delightful little lad. One evening during first grade, the anticipated little wolf dog bit Eru's leg, who had attempted to climb over a wall. When Paifan laughed heartily in his room, startling the system with his exuberance. By the time he entered second grade, Eru had married the fiercely strong daughter of a butcher from a neighboring village, initially seeking a laborer to serve him. To his dismay, this woman was immensely strong, leaving Eru powerless and subject to daily beatings. Consequently, when Paifan's favorite pastime became waking up half an hour early each day to circle around Eru's home, relishing the sight of his torment. Naturally, I indulged this small request, though it couldn't be an everyday occurrence. After several months, I finally grew weary of early mornings and gently restrained the eager child, informing him, no matter how noisy the cicadas are, they only sing through the summer. You have countless important endeavors ahead of you. Python, do not squander your time on the unworthy. While this may have been an excuse to avoid waking early, it was also a heartfelt truth. I understood how much when Python cared about Eru, for that was the beginning of all his miseries. However, he should not allow his entire focus to rest on Eru. His destiny was meant for a broader horizon. When Python gazed at me for a long while, ultimately reddening his eyes and erupting into his first genuine cry. Perhaps the burdens on his heart had finally been lifted, for the system notified me that his affection for me had reached a remarkable 100%. I was not surprised. When one possesses 100 candies, they naturally share generously with others. The system inquired, "Are you leaving?" I shook my head, resolved that this life would continue in bliss. As for when Python's epilogue, when I faced execution by firearm, I felt no sorrow. Only relief. This miserable life was finally coming to an end. If there is a next life, I wish to be a tree, a flower, anything but a human. Being human is far too burdensome. However, when I reopened my eyes and beheld the gentle woman before me, who claimed to be my mother, I was momentarily taken aback. I had never encountered my biological parents, and the only fragments of information I had about her came from the vile words of that scoundrel. Countless times, I pondered whether my life would have been better had she survived. At the very least, I would not have been driven away like a stray dog. Yet, no amount of speculation could compare to the reality she presented before me. A life filled with happiness and sweetness. The fists and kicks that haunted my nightmares transformed into tender hands. The stench of alcohol that once permeated the air was replaced by the delightful sweetness of candy and the inviting aroma of freshly baked cookies. If this were a dream, I would not wish to awaken from it. On my first venture outside, I felt a mixture of anxiety and absurdity. I had faced the brutality of being kicked and suffering broken ribs without fear, yet as a child, I seemed increasingly fragile. The world appeared vast, and all I could see were the feet of adults. It was an instinct I could not resist. However, she described me as a little warrior, urging me to embark on an adventure. Along the way, I encountered large uncles and greedy little ones who wished to claim her as their mother, as well as dazed little sparrows. It truly felt like an adventure, where sweet syrup quenched my thirst and fragrant candies satisfied my hunger. I was no longer alone. I seemed to have fallen into the fairy tale world she spoke of, where the wind in the air, the birdsong in my ears, and the grass by the roadside all came to life. I vividly realized I had changed. Once I had fought with wild dogs for scraps of food, yet now I had learned to share and appreciate the beauty of life. At that moment, I could hardly wait to see her again. The seemingly endless road no longer terrified me. I began to run, and laughter bubbled forth, for she awaited me at the end. Today, I found myself crying for reasons I could not quite fathom. There was no particular cause. It was simply that when the shopkeeper inquired what I wanted, I could not decide. I felt that as a 4-year-old child, reborn from the future, I should be able to effortlessly select a small gift, glancing around and precisely identifying what I desired, then casually asking for it to be wrapped. That was the expectation I had for myself, at least in my mind. Yet, the reality was that I resembled a true 4-year-old, caught in indecision. Cookies and candy seemed too ordinary. I would usually treat little girls to such things. Fabric dolls were out of the question, as they would likely be confiscated by adults. I thought perhaps I should just leave with her instead. But she gently inquired if I had made a choice. How irritating it was that she could always read my thoughts. I sulked in silence, and instead of leaving, she carried me around the store. I should have insisted on walking myself. I was not tired, but I felt as though my mouth were glued shut. Yet, I knew I would forever remember this afternoon, as she taught me that it was perfectly fine to take things slow. Now, I find it difficult to discern whether the painful memories in my mind truly exist. Perhaps those memories are the dreams, merely reminders to cherish my current life. Thus, when I encountered that man once more, I felt as though I might lose my sanity. No one could ruin my present life. I needed to eliminate him. Each day, I set aside a portion of my food for the little wolf pup at home and trained it. Bite him to death. Tear him apart. The long-forgotten dark thoughts surged back, but before they could engulf me, a pair of hands shattered the darkness. She asked if I wanted a cookie, and I pursed my lips. She had no idea of the gravity of the situation. This was hardly the time for cookies. Yet I had to admit, the cookies were indeed delicious. Crunch, crunch, crunch.
Ah, strawberry flavor.
I started school, an experience I had never had in my previous life. I understood that eventually I would resume my studies, and those who had been educated could lead fulfilling lives. I had once envied that greatly. Now I had my own opportunity. However, school life seemed a tad different from my expectations. Today, the plump girl managed to sit next to me, but during lunch, she turned and knocked me to the ground, leaving me utterly humiliated and furious. After class, Dog Dan insisted on asking me questions, stubbornly claiming that 2 plus 3 equaled 6. I explained for 10 minutes, yet he insisted I would never make a good teacher. What a fool. The little girl had snatched my snacks again. This was the 5th, or perhaps countless times. After school, older, mischievous children blocked my path, demanding protection money. Let me show you the strength of a former bully. However, before I could strike, a group of classmates rushed out, shouting, "Don't bully Fan." Then, tripping over their own feet, they burst into tears. Help. As for my studies, I was not exactly a genius either. The question was, do you like spring?
Why?
I replied, yes, because spring has strawberries and I love strawberries. The correction read, incorrect. Spring is when all things revive, the scenery is breathtaking, and everywhere is teeming with life. What a lie. That was not at all what I thought.
Mom.
The teacher marked my answer wrong.
The end.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please remember to like and subscribe. Until our next story, goodbye.